I'd like to introduce Dr. Becky Macaulay-Wrench. Her talk is The Search for Life and Habitable Worlds at NASA, Past, Present, and Future. Dr. Wrench is the program scientist in the Planetary Science Division at NASA headquarters. She leads the Planetary Protection Research Program, co-leads the Habitable Worlds Program. Who would not want to co-lead the Habitable Worlds Program for NASA? And that's a part of the astrobiology, in association with the astrobiology program. And for those of you who heard Dr. Stern's discussion last night of New Horizons, she also serves as the program scientist, which is someone within NASA who works with the PI to make sure everything's going well on the mission. She's the program scientist for New Horizons. So someone you're really going to want to bend the ear of during the week. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speaker.
All right, awesome. And thank you all for being here and welcoming me. This is my very first Interstellar Symposium, so I'm very excited to just hear everyone talk and meet folks. Hopefully I'll catch you at a break or lunch. Perfect. Okay, advancing slides. So first off, I wanted to kind of introduce myself and give you some background of who I am and, you know, who I am as a person and my identity. So I identify as she, her. I'm an astrobiologist, so I think there's a couple in this room. I'm a NASA scientist, as Les described. I'm a first-generation college student, so I went to West Virginia University for my undergraduate. I'm a child of Appalachia. I can very much relate to the Tennessee Valley. I'm a mother to small children. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at home. I'm a public servant. I believe very strongly in public service and science as a service, and doing anything to kind of benefit humankind. I'm a lover of science fiction, which is probably part of the reason I'm here. And I'm a board gamer. I love board games, you know, whether it's Betrayal at House on the Hill or Settlers of Catan, whatever it is. I love those. I don't get to play them as much as I would like because I'm a mother to small children. But would love to connect with anyone on that as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about astrobiology, and I have a couple things in here, videos and whatnot, because I kind of want to bring everyone up to be at the same level in terms of some knowledge around astrobiology and what that is. So astrobiology at NASA, right? So this has been something we've been doing since the 1960s. It's the interdisciplinary study of life in the context of the universe. And we focus on 3 fundamental questions. So how does life begin and evolve? How does life exist elsewhere in the universe? And what is the future of life on Earth and beyond? And so I always tell people this is the best science because those are the big questions that not just scientists, but everyone wants answered at some point. Right now, the astrobiology program at NASA has a couple different components to it. So we have, in the top box here, I have my research coordination networks. These are networks of scientists that are NASA-funded scientists that are interested in some big questions in astrobiology. So just kind of quickly, we have our Nexus. Those are the folks that are interested in exoplanets. Network for life detection, that's Enfold. Name kind of explains itself. Network for ocean worlds. So these are the folks looking out at ocean worlds and what those mean for habitability and life. Life, early cells to multicellularity. This one is one that's close to my heart because I work with them directly. They're focused on how do you get from early cells to multicellularity on Earth? What's the context around that? And then prebiotic chemistry and early Earth environments, PCE3. These folks are focused on prebiotic chemistry and origin of life. So those are our research coordination networks. That's something we've just started in the past few years. It's a very grassroots network of scientists to help really advance those big questions. Then we have our research programs. So we have things like the large grants, the Interdisciplinary Consortia for Astrobiology Research, are called ICAR. Exobiology, Habitable Worlds, that's one of the programs that I run. Emerging Worlds, and then some technology programs like Picasso and Matisse. and then planetary protection research, which I also run. And then we have missions. So we have missions that have already occurred in the past, like Viking 1 and 2 in the 1970s. We have Kepler that found exoplanets. We have Curiosity, which I'm the program scientist on, that's at Mars and has told us that Mars was once a habitable world. We got Perseverance there collecting samples for Mars sample return, and Europa Clipper planned for 2024 launch. So these are all missions that are have some connection to astrobiology, some more than others. Okay, so now I'm going to play a video that is hopefully going to kind of bring everyone up to the same speed on what we mean whenever we talk about habitable worlds and habitable zones.
We inhabit a little blue planet called Earth. Earth is habitable because it had the right conditions and ingredients to enable life as we know it to evolve and flourish. And one of the most important factors in our planet habitable is the wet stuff itself, water. It's kind of extremely important for life. When it comes to the search for habitable exoplanets, planets outside our solar system, we think the ability to have liquid water on a planet's surface is just as important for those worlds. There's a handy concept astronomers use to help them figure out where to look around any given star for exoplanets that just might have the right stuff for life. It's called the habitable zone. It's the distance from a star where a rocky planet with an atmosphere could have liquid water on its surface. In our solar system, the habitable zone extends from around the orbit of Venus to around the orbit of Mars. Earth happens to be nice and comfy in the middle, but it takes more than just a good location. Orbiting in the habitable zone does not guarantee a planet will be habitable. After all, the moon is right here with us, but it's certainly not habitable. Sorry, moon. The location of the habitable zone depends on how big and bright a star is. The nearest star to our sun, Proxima Centauri, has at least one planet in the habitable zone. But because Proxima is much smaller and dimmer than our sun, its habitable zone is way smaller and closer to the star. So every star has a habitable zone, but that doesn't mean there will be planets. For example, the star known as Kepler 90 is similar to our sun, and it too has planets. But they're all huddled super close to the star, well inside of the habitable zone. But the longer we look, the more likely it becomes that one day we'll find another little blue water-covered planet right in its all comfy habitable zone. And that would be a planet with a closer look indeed.
Awesome. So a little cartoony, but hopefully some great explanation. Sure, advance. Okay. So now I want to get into a little bit of what it has looked like to search for life in habitable worlds at NASA, both past, present, and in the future. So in the past, right, we've had Viking and Kepler missions, as well as lots of astrobiology research and technology development. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Viking and Kepler, just to bring folks that may not be knowledgeable about those missions. And I also want to share some videos of some of my colleagues talking about some of the questions we get about astrobiology. So this is my colleague, Lindsay Hayes.
Do aliens exist? That's a really interesting question, and one that we have been trying to understand and explore and figure out for a really long time. We have not yet discovered life on any other planet. We haven't seen any scientifically supported evidence for extraterrestrial life. But if we think about life on this planet beyond the big things, the elephants, the whales, redwoods, and focus on the tiny things, nearly everywhere on Earth that we've looked, we found microbial life. And our definition of habitable continues to expand. Off the Earth, we've only begun to look. NASA has sent 5 rovers and 4 landers to the surface of Mars. And in addition to that, our orbiters have been outfitted with some amazing cameras to take pictures of the whole surface of the planet. And we've only explored a tiny fraction of Mars. And that's only one of the promising bodies to look for life in our solar system. There are icy moons in the outer solar system, like Enceladus and Europa, that look like they may have subsurface oceans that could be habitable. And then that's just what's in our solar system. The more exoplanets we find around other stars, the more we learn about how many different environments could exist for life. So we can't yet say for sure whether or not aliens exist. But to quote Carl Sagan, the universe is a pretty big place. If it's just us, it seems like an awful waste of space. So we will keep looking.
That is what we are doing. We are keeping looking. So there's a lot to explore. I like to remind folks that Mars and many planets are not just points in the sky, they're entire planets. And if you think about exploration here on our own world, it takes a long time to fully understand a world. So one of the first astrobiology missions, one of the first missions to Mars, the Viking 1 and 2, this was the first mission to reach the Martian surface, and it was the first to search for evidence of life on Mars. It's a very great mission, actually, if you think about the 1970s, really amazing. It was 2 landers. They conducted 3 biology experiments that were designed to look for signs of life, at least based off of our understanding of life at that time and what to look for. And it taught us a great deal, actually, about how little we knew about life on Earth. The number of discoveries we've made in astrobiology studying life on Earth since the 1970s are actually quite astounding. What we know now about DNA and what we know about life in deep sea environments and sediments and what energy sources life can use, what sort of extremes it can survive in. Our knowledge is just greatly expanded since those early days with the Viking 1 and 2. It did, the experiments from Viking 1 and 2 actually even prompted a 2008 surprise result from NASA's Phoenix Mars lander, which suggests that soil examined by the Viking Mars landers may have contained some carbon-based chemical building blocks of life. So that's some pretty cool. So we're still learning stuff from Viking decades later. So very cool. Can't talk about astrobiology and search for life without talking about the Allen Hills meteorite. So this is something that was in headlines in the 1990s. So this was a meteorite from Mars. It was found in Antarctica in 1984, and folks thought that it presented some clear signs that microbial life once existed on Mars. And so there were images that people thought were bacteria in the meteorite, and there was even press announcements, and the United States president is talking about finding life on Mars. We don't think that this meteorite actually showed life on Mars, but it did teach us lots of things about what we know about life and what we are looking for whenever we look at things like that. Okay, so kind of hinted at some of this. We can learn a lot about studying life here on Earth in our search for life elsewhere. So some of the things that we've really learned is that life is super tough, right? We have extremophiles. Pretty much everywhere you look on Earth, you find life making its way using a variety of energy sources, surviving in, high pH, high temperature, low temperature. Life is everywhere. It's very tenacious. It has very long survival times. We tend to be very human-centric in a lot of things we think of in the human lifespan, right? But microbes and many kinds of organisms on Earth can live for tens of thousands of years. They can get into a form that they can survive for millions of years in spores and things like that and be revived. So it's very amazing. And then when conditions get tough, life moves inside rocks. So that's something we see over and over again. And it's metabolically diverse. So if it has energy, if life can find a way to eat it, it will. That's what we see over and over again. It's some really cool examples, even if you look at man-made chemicals and things like that, and how life has figured out ways to eat those. So Kepler, this was a mission to look at exoplanets and stars, a telescope out there. So this taught us that planets outnumber stars. Small planets are common. Planets are diverse. And solar systems are diverse too. Not every solar system looks like our solar system. They look very different. There's a whole diversity out there. Analysis of Kepler's discoveries have concluded that 20 to 50% of the stars visible in the night sky are likely to have small, possibly rocky planets similar to our Earth and located within the habitable zone of their parent stars. So that's a pretty amazing number to begin to think about whenever you look up at the night sky and the number of stars that are there. It discovered more than 2,600 planets around other stars. And I know we've talked about how many exoplanets we've discovered. That number has grown significantly, but Kepler was a big part of getting that to where it was. And this is just a nice little graphic showing the Kepler discovery of solar systems. So you can see our solar system there. Things are to scale. And then these are all of the solar systems that Kepler helped discover. You can see, most of them are kind of close into their star. That has to do with the method that they were used to detect it. But just a vast number of solar systems out there. And you can see kind of the diversity of what's been found so far, and where our solar system kind of scales up against those, right? So just a whole sorts of different solar systems out there. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing today with our missions that are doing astrobiology. Mostly that's Curiosity, Perseverance, and JWST. And to start us off, I'm going to share a video with my colleague Heather Graham talking about life on Mars.
Is there life on Mars? So we've been looking for life on Mars for a long time. And while NASA hasn't found any evidence of life now, we found lots of evidence that Mars could have supported life in the past. There's lots of pieces of evidence that say there was once a huge ocean on Mars and an atmosphere that could have supported life. But there's still a lot of Mars left to explore. There are places that are potentially habitable, like the deep subsurface. There are places underground that could have fluids in them where organisms could live, and they'd be protected from the radiation that's so harmful on the surface. We're just now getting instruments onto the Martian surface that can help us understand these potentially habitable places. And we can ask deeper questions about the potential for habitability in those rock cores. So is there life on Mars? Not that we've found yet, but there's still a lot of Mars left to explore.
Yes. Okay. So still lots to explore at Mars. One of the rovers that we are using to explore Mars is the Mars Science Laboratory and Curiosity. And so this is just a little update on where Curiosity is right now. So it's headed towards the Upper Geddes-Vallis Ridge, which, may record some of one of the most recent episodes of Liquid Water on Mount Sharp, where it's located. This rover has driven over 30 kilometers since it got to Mars and traveled about 700 vertical meters up the slope. All 10 instruments on board are still going strong after over 10 years. And it completed its 38th successful drill sampling campaign in May at Ubahara. We also just did a software update. I think that this is so amazing that, we have these spacecraft and we're still figuring out ways to make them operate more efficiently, effectively, and giving them new tools as we go. So that's great. Some science from Curiosity. Recently, there was, we looked at this rock with, has some very clear wave ripples. So that was pretty cool to find, especially as we were going up the slope, right? So up the slope, closer to present day in time. And so while there's been a lot of debate as to whether or not the lakes that exist in Gale Crater were covered with ice or not, what these ripples indicate is that there must have been a shallow part of an ice-free lake at that time in Mars history, with wind-driven waves at the surface. So most of the rocks that were seen by Curiosity lacked these wave ripples. So we were excited to kind of see this. And it really tells us that there was time in Mars' ancient climate where it was warm enough and had an atmosphere that was thick enough to allow water to neither freeze nor rapidly evaporate. So that's really cool in the search for life and thinking about the Mars environment. Mars 2020 Perseverance rover is also on the surface of Mars with the Ingenuity helicopter. So most recently, Perseverance has explored Oahu outcrop and has been looking. It also recently dropped some of its samples as a little bit of a cache to make sure we successfully complete Mars sample return. And Ingenuity completed its 52nd flight, so that's pretty amazing. It was the first motorized flight power on Mars, so that was cool. Anyway, let me move on to the science highlight here. I wanted to share, I thought this was interesting. This actually relates to both curiosity and perseverance, but it's kind of a question of, are we digging deep enough with these rovers and to really understand organics and materials that give us some insight into habitability? There were some researchers that were looking at amino acids to kind of understand, would these be preserved on the Martian surface? They blasted them with gamma radiation to basically simulate 800 million years of radiation exposure. And what they saw was that they were probably destroyed by cosmic rays, right? And so this is just more evidence that, if we really want to search Mars for life and understand the biological or potential biological history of Mars, we've got to be able to really get into that subsurface in some way. All right, shifting gears a little bit, James Webb Space Telescope. This is an amazing telescope that NASA has put into space. So this is going to be used for a lot of things, but it is going to be used to search for some habitable worlds, and it's going to do some very detailed observations. Right, it's an amazing telescope, and it might even help us, find some exoplanets that are Earth-like, or that even have some signatures that maybe we can see with James Webb. So very cool. And, I wanted to share a couple research areas that relate to kind of looking at data from telescopes like James Webb or future telescopes, right? So we have a lot of researchers that are modelers that are trying to understand, if we do find an exoplanet that has some sort of signs of life, what might those look like? And how do we understand what's, really a sign of life versus some sort of abiotic process? We had this researcher, Lori Felton. She was looking at atmosphere exchange and the signs of life. And so what she was looking at in particular was, could the exchange of chemicals between two exoplanets be mistaken for signs of life when observing one of them? And so they modeled some exoplanet atmospheres and simulated how those might look with James Webb. Specifically, they simulated cases where oxygen atoms entered the top of the atmosphere. This is a process we see on Titan. Maybe that would accumulate some oxygen or ozone, which some people think is a potential biosignature in the atmosphere. And what their results showed in their models was that methane could survive this oxygen influx, but that oxygen ozone could not build up to detectable levels. So therefore, a rocky planet seeded with water, oxygen from external sources, it's unlikely that this would be mistaken for signs of life when observing with JWST or future telescopes. So that's great. And then here's another research from Schweiderman et al. And this was they're looking at N2O as a biosignature on exoplanets. So N2O is a product of biological nitrogen metabolism, at least here on Earth. And so they're looking to see if this could accumulate to detectable abundances on a terrestrial exoplanet, therefore maybe being something we could detect from a telescope. They, thinking about these biogenic gases, they predicted the sorts of concentrations that you might see over a range of oxygen levels, host star spectral types, all sorts of things. And they showed that it was possible to detect N2O productivity with an exoplanet like TRAPPIST-1e. So this is something that we could potentially detect. Okay, so I also wanted to just talk a little bit about what we're thinking in the astrobiology field in terms of looking at these biosignatures and how we actually get to a point where we say, oh, we've detected life or something like that. So there was this great paper and work done by a group in 2018 called The Ladder of Life Detection. And basically, this is a great paper. You should read it if you're interested in this. But what it gets at is that there are many components to making a claim about detecting life. And you're not just going to be after one piece of data. whenever you do that. Rather, you're looking for a variety of pieces of data, and you're looking how all of those things fit in context with one another, and what it means about, whether or not it's repeatable. And what I think is most important about this is that last thing there on the very bottom is that it's a last resort hypothesis, right? Whenever you're going to make the claim of, we have found life, you have disproved every other possibility. That's where you really want to get to whenever you make such claims. And going to the next chart, this is, and this describes a variety of things you might detect and how those fit into what you're looking at. So, it's kind of cut off there by the icons, but at the very bottom, you have habitability, right? So that's the very first thing you're looking for. You're looking for a habitable environment. And once you've got that, you go, okay, that's a great check mark. But then there's a lot of other things that you want to look for. And you want to understand how all of those things may relate to each other, whether it's, textures of a rock, right? So we have stromatolites here on Earth. Finding those elsewhere would be amazing. But then also looking for all the way up through something like Darwinian evolution and seeing some sort of process in play. So for any of you interested in doing this or trying to do a life detection work, you should definitely read this paper and kind of understand how all these pieces fit together. And then another piece of that is the standards of evidence. And so there was a workshop that we did on standards of evidence and biosignatures. And basically, this is the thinking that, if we were going to detect extraterrestrial life, it's not really going to be an instantaneous or unambiguous event. It's very unlikely. But it is very high stakes, right? People are very interested in it. That's why I have videos that ask, do aliens exist? And NASA scientists answering that question. But this is an explicit goal, right, that we want to try to achieve. And so what this workshop is trying to get at is, what are all of the pieces, in addition to that ladder of life detection, that you want to see? What's the best process for kind of going about evaluating and supporting those discoveries and reporting that information? And they came up with 5 questions that, someone really wants to think about whenever they're assessing a biosignature, right? So, is the signal you've detected authentic? Have you adequately identified the signal, right? Are you misinterpreting it for something else? Are there abiotic sources for that detection? That kind of ties back to hypothesis of last resort. Is it likely that life would produce this expression in this environment, right? So thinking about the context of where you are, not just the signal that you're getting. And then, are there independent lines of evidence to support a biological or non-biological explanation, right? So making sure all of those pieces come together before you make such, not outlandish, but such big claims about search for life or finding life somewhere. Okay, and now I want to get a little bit into future of where we're going. Once again, astrobiology research and tech development go throughout all of this. So planetary environments are diverse, right? Whenever we look even within our own solar system, we see a variety of planets. The unaltered surface of most planets are cold, and that means that they're dry. But their interior environments may be more similar to Earth, and therefore may have environments that are more hospitable to life. So we're interested in possible subsurface oceans, both those that are hot and cold, and subsurface rocks that may be similar to rocks on Earth that life inhabits. So we're interested in exploring the variety of ocean worlds in our solar system, and these are some of them. Interestingly, ocean worlds in our solar system have 30 times more water than the volume here on Earth, right? So if you think about life here on Earth in our own oceans and how much biomass that is, looking in through the rest of the solar system, it's 30 times as much. So if there's life there, hopefully we'll find it. We have this amazing mission. I think it's so cool. Dragonfly that's going to be going to Titan. This is a rotorcraft lander that's going to be exploring prebiotic chemistry and habitability at dozens of sites on Saturn's moon Titan. I think it's so cool. If this is a mission you're familiar with, it kind of hops as it goes along, right? So it like scouts out things and flies forward and then comes back and lands and does science and then continues to do that. So it's really cool. It's supposed to be launching in 2027 and landing in 2034. Here's hoping we see that in the 2030s. We've got Europa Clipper. Let me see if I can make that play. That's the clean room live. You can check out that on YouTube. Watch them build that spacecraft. It's going to be launching in October of 2024. So primary objective of the Europa Clipper mission is to determine the thickness of Europa's icy shell and to search for subsurface lakes, similar to those below Antarctica. So, the subsurface environments in the outer solar system are a really great place to search for life because they have a lot of the right conditions, we think, for life, right? It's got that liquid water, it's possibly got organics, it's got energy availability, all the things we want to see whenever we're searching for life. Okay, and next I'm going to give you all a little bit of art. The poet laureate for the United States did a poem to go along with the Europa Clipper mission, and there's this great video to go along with it.
In Praise of Mystery, a poem for Europa. Arching under the night sky, inky with black expansiveness, we point to the planets we know. We pin quick wishes on stars. From Earth, we read the sky as if it is an unerring book of the universe, expert and evident. Still, there are mysteries below our sky. The whale song, the songbird singing its call in the bough of a wind-shaken tree. We are creatures of constant awe, curious at beauty, at leaf and blossom, at grief and pleasure, sun and shadow. And it is not darkness that unites us, not the cold distance of space, but the offering of water. Each drop of rain, each rivulet, each pulse, each vein. O second moon, we too are made of water, of vast and beckoning seas. We too are made of wonders, of great and ordinary loves, of small invisible worlds, of a need to call out through the dark.
Send your name to Europa with that link there at the end. I encourage you to do so. It's a cool little campaign to involve folks in our missions. Okay, now I also want to talk about another effort we've been undergoing. So I've been co-leading this work at looking at our strategy for Mars, robotic Mars exploration for the next 20 years. And normally this is a 45-minute presentation, but I don't have that time. So I've cut down a couple slides. I just want to make sure you all are familiar with what we're thinking about for future of Mars robotic exploration. And I encourage you, if you want to learn more, the entire slide deck is posted on the web, and we do welcome comments on our plans. So our tagline for this is Exploring Mars Together. This is very much about bringing everyone along for the ride to Mars. And this is our current Mars and future Mars fleet, right? And you can see some of the things that we've been doing with that fleet. So we started with following the water, then exploring habitability, and now we're starting to get into seeking signs of life, all the while preparing for future human explorers. So I've mentioned a couple times the Mars sample return. So this is a thing that the Mars science community has been excited about for decades. And we're finally getting to the point where that is, kind of coming together. So the Mars exploration program at NASA is responsible for two sides of that. We're responsible for collecting the samples with Perseverance rover, and then for the sample receiving facility on the samples that will come back. And, this is going to achieve a lot of our decadal class science that we're interested in, having those samples back here and being able to do a variety of laboratory experiments on them will be really great, actually, for Search for Life. In terms of thinking about exploring Mars together and this future plan for the next 20 years, we have 3 science themes that we're going to be focused on. Exploring the potential for Martian life, which obviously very much ties into my talk here. Supporting human exploration of Mars, and discovering dynamic Mars, which is all about understanding Mars as a system. So all of the various processes that occur on that planet. In the next 20 years, we expect that a lot of emerging capabilities will enable new competitive missions that will help us strengthen infrastructure, transportation opportunities. I'm thinking about helicity fusion, right? And thinking about tugs to Mars, and a really inclusive exploration. So we're going to be expanding opportunities through frequent, low-cost, small missions to produce really impactful science. We need to maintain and build out our crucial infrastructure at Mars, reducing the cost of access to Mars through partnerships and low-cost launch vehicle providers, new delivery systems. This is making sure everyone can get there together. Developing technologies that enable new capabilities for exploring Mars, and making it more accessible and inclusive to the broader community. So these are the 3 science themes. I don't need to get into these much more, but, exploring the potential for Martian life, right? We want to continue that astrobiological search, habitability, biosignatures, support for the human exploration, and the synergistic observations we can do in support of that, and then discovering Mars as a system and doing some comparative planetology to understand both our own planet, exoplanets, anything we can learn from Mars. And just to get a little bit more into detail on the one of those that really relates to my talk, we're going to be searching for biosignatures, both past and present, looking at the places that those are most likely to be preserved based off what we know about past and current habitability. We also want to understand temporal and geographic patterns of habitability. So at this point, we know Mars was once habitable. Great. Now we want to understand how was that over a period of time? Were there pockets? Were they sustained? What can we learn about that? And that a lot of that ties to physical access to the subsurface. So that's something we're going to be looking at. And then examining those samples that come back from our sample return, all while keeping in mind planetary protection principles and making sure we're doing a great job of both not contaminating the Mars surface and also not bringing back any sort of contamination that would be a threat to Earth. And then we have 4 initiatives that we'll be focused on in the next 20 years. So we want to expand opportunities through those lower cost, frequent missions to Mars. We want to strengthen our infrastructure, invest in key technologies that are going to increase our scientific understanding. And we want to enable participation in Mars exploration for all communities. And I just, whenever I read that, I think about the great land acknowledgement that I saw yesterday from McGill University, and thinking about the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. Sorry if I mispronounced that. But I'm excited to kind of engage all of these different communities in exploration at Mars. This is our aspirational timeline for some missions. You can see the box over here to the right is whenever we expect human explorers to get there. And here in the mid-2030s, in the second row, you can see a search for life mission to Mars, a medium-class mission that we're hoping will happen based off of some decadal priorities that were laid out by the National Academies of Sciences. So a lot of things happening at Mars, hopefully, in the next 20 years. And if you're interested in providing any feedback on that, I strongly encourage you to email that. Don't worry about the date on that. We're still taking feedback as we work on our written document. It's always a work in progress. That's part of bringing people along together. Okay. So, doing okay on time. All right, last thing I want to talk about is, and there's no sound with this, is Habitable Worlds Observer. So this is something that so I'm in the Planetary Science Division, but our partners over in the Astrophysics Division have this telescope that is part of their decadal priorities. This will be a telescope. Oh, I don't think it's actually playing. Maybe it's buffering. That's okay. This will be a telescope, hopefully, launched in the 2040s. It'll do UV through IR. It'll most likely be placed at a Lagrange point. It'll be serviceable, hopefully. And the hope is that this will be able to detect Earth-like planets around Sun-like stars and give us some information about their potential habitability. So these are some simulated things that we're thinking, how Worlds Observer might be able to do, right? So it might be able to show us images like there on the left of a planet circling a star in another solar system and provide us some sort of simulated spectra that we might be able to gain some insights into what sort of gases or what sort of things we can detect in the atmosphere of that planet. Depending upon the size of the telescope that's actually commissioned, it can detect a variety of number of planets of various sizes, right? So Jupiter sized all the way down to habitable planet candidates. And even with the lowest size telescope, we're still hoping that we'll get a couple of detections. Okay, and then I'm going to share my last slide, which is just hopefully be thought-provoking for you all. And I think this is probably the most interesting for this group, which is just to think about what's possible over the next decades, right? So let's say in the 2040s, we have Worlds Observer, and it starts the search for Earth-like worlds around Sun-like stars. And, it finds one that's not too far away, right? Maybe in a nearby solar system. And then, what if we launched something in the 2060s? What if we actually had the capability of launching something that could actually do some science at a reasonable percentage of the speed of light, and it could make its way out of our solar system. And it could do science on the way out. It could teach us tons about our heliosphere and interstellar space. And, what if we do this in a way that it's almost like a scattershot approach, or it's a relay network, and it can send back information as it's going along, and it keeps people engaged, right? You don't have a mission team that launches it and never sees the end, right? You have a mission team that grows every year with new people coming on and some people retiring and leaving off, right? So that it's a continual team that stays engaged in this. And then what? We get data back from another solar system, right, in the early 2100s that actually tells us something amazing about a habitable world around another star. And I loved Claudio Macone's talk the other day about interstellar comms, and I think that ties a role into this in some way. We have folks interested in interstellar probes, and those folks mentioned that yesterday. And I also think Victor Trott's talk yesterday about the gravitational lens and looking at exoplanets, right, fits into this as well, right, in terms of maybe that's one of the steps along this path to actually doing a mission to another star system and getting some data back. So anyway, I just want to leave you with those thoughts. I think it's a cool idea. It's not something we will do, in a few, short time scale, but thinking on the really long term and thinking about decades-long planetary missions, we can get there. And that's all.
Don't run away. We built in some time for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand till you get the microphone, and then we'll go from there. Thank you. Raise your hand if you have a question.
Shay?
The test mission was conspicuously absent from your presentation. I haven't been hearing much about it in the media. I'm curious, since I believe Kepler was only focused on one area of the sky, whereas TESS was supposed to be scanning the entire sky. Has there been any updates on that mission? Has it reinforced the findings of Kepler and how common planets are?
No, it's not absent for any particular reason other than I only have so much time to talk, and there's several missions that it would have been great to add more information about, even things like OSIRIS-REx and what that's going to teach us about prebiotic chemistry. So, I'm not in the astrophysics group. I'm not like really focused on exoplanets myself. I'm more of a microbiologist. So I don't really have more information for you about tests, but it's not absent for any other reason other than time constraints and what I included.
In recent years, there's been interest in looking for something that's called techno-signatures, the signs of advanced civilization technologies. Any plans for exploring that?
Yeah, so, techno-signatures are a small subset of biosignatures, right? They're only going to be found with an intellectual civilization that is at some sort of large scale. So we're much more focused right now on more microbial biosignatures because we think those are likely to be much more prevalent in the universe. Definitely something that we can actually even do ground truthing on at planets closer to home. There are folks out there doing searches for technosignatures. There are some allowances in some of the NASA programs to support that, but in a very specific way that isn't just listening for those signatures, but really, fully understanding what we might find and what it means to know through like things like standards of evidence and the ladder of life detection. How do you know you really have found something that's a good signal, right? So we are interested in those sorts of things.
Exciting topic. Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is, I know phosphine detection has been controversial and going back and forth, but my question really is there any interest in NASA or any work at NASA looking at the upper atmosphere of Venus or maybe the Jovian planets or things like that?
Yes. And we do fund some Venus work in the Habitable Worlds program. It's exactly right? So the atmosphere of Venus is, potentially habitable. The jury's still out. Phosphine was a very controversial thing, and that kind of ties into really thinking about the context of your measurements and the data and what it might mean. Not necessarily jumping to a conclusion based off of one data point. But Venus as a potentially habitable place in terms of its atmosphere and thinking about how that relates to exoplanets and what we might detect there is definitely of interest. And we have folks that are, we have missions to Venus that are upcoming. I didn't mention those either. And then, we have a lot of modeling and a very little amount of work done on the data that's already come back from Venus just because there's not as much Venus data as there is Mars data.
Even the nearby star and see another planet, or is that just completely unfeasible because of all the time duration and heat involved in things?
So there have been some people that have looked at panspermia in the past. It's not a major topic that NASA is focused on in astrobiology, and I'll say that from the perspective of it almost doesn't matter. From the perspective of when you're searching for life, you eventually want to understand origin of life and things like that. But if I'm looking at Mars or Europa or an exoplanet for life, I'm not immediately concerned with how that life got there, right? My first order of operations is there life there? And so that's what I think we're more focused on. And so there's not a whole lot of researchers at NASA or a lot of work that's being funded on panspermia.
Can you talk a little bit about the agnostic biosignatures and how can we incorporate some of that work into the upcoming missions like Dragonfly or HabWorlds, or also how can we incorporate some artificial intelligence into those payloads?
Yeah, so we have the Agnostics Biosignatures Lab at Goddard Space Flight Center. That's probably the first place I would send you, and Heather Graham, actually, that I included in the video, is part of that lab. So, just for everyone, agnostic biosignatures are, basically I could look at this and I could know that this is a form from biology without really any concern about whether or not it's DNA particularly or something like that. So I think they play a huge role in our search for life. I don't know if, we could incorporate a lot of that into current missions that are already in development and have already been selected. It's kind of hard to do that. But the work that goes on in the Agnostics Biosignature Lab and other labs definitely influences the analysis of the data that'll come back from those missions and kind of understanding that. To get at the AI question, I think it has a huge role to play in every discipline, right? Bringing any tool to bear on these big problems is great. You just have to be concerned about what you're feeding into it, what it's actually accomplishing, and then what sort of conclusions you're going to make on the other side of it, right? So it's, I mentioned a lot of modeling, right? And modeling is great, and it's one of the only ways we can right now understand biosignatures and atmospheres of worlds that are not like any worlds here in our own solar system, but they are only as good as the constraints that have been put on there on our understanding of how physical processes interact with one another. And so you have to be cautious whenever you're using that to make some sort of conclusions. And I just think the same thing is true for AI and the role that it can play. But it can help us a lot with the productivity of a mission, right? Because the more a robotic explorer, because it's a lot easier to send a robotic explorer to places like Europa than it is a human explorer, the more it can act independently, the more data we can get back out of it, and the more perfect context or location decisions that it can make, the better we can get the data.
Hello, so thank you for the talk. And I had a simple question for water worlds. Essentially, water is best environment for microbial life to start, but it's also incredibly good at blocking radiations. And so transient methods, how does it work on water worlds? How can you cannot use spectroscopy to get the content of that water? So I was wondering, how do you intend of, do you just ignore them, or do you intend on studying them, and how do you intend on using your telescope to look at them?
So thinking about exoplanet water worlds. Okay. Great question. We're very limited, right, in what we can do right now. Even with probes we could send to water worlds in our own solar system, right, and understanding what we can get from those to understand the subsurface ocean, right? The best thing you can do is drill through the ice, get to the water, and really do some analysis. Obviously, we're a long way from doing that on any sort of exoplanet, right? My last slide just would be a probe that would probably do a fly, maybe give you some photographs or really very little information, right, compared to what you're talking about. So we're a long way from that. There are some things you can do, once again, trying to rely on models to understand what sort of signals you might see in an atmosphere that relate to the surface conditions on the planet. And that goes for water worlds as well as worlds that have land masses on them. So the greater understanding we can get through modeling, the better we'll be prepared to plan future missions.
Thank you very much. Great talk.